To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it close to your bones as though our lives depended on it, and when the time comes, let it go, let it go. We are gathered here today to honor the memory and celebrate the life of Edgar May. He touched all of us in very different ways. Some people here are family members, some people here are friends, some people here are his peers and colleagues from politics. And as we sit here, everybody's looking this way, but I invite you to just take a moment to look around and see who's here and see what Edgar helped to create, this moment of all these amazing people gathered here. For without him, we wouldn't be here either. This morning, or this afternoon, we're going to hear some words from a variety of people who were close to Edgar. And as you may know, this is being streamed on the World Wide Web. So, watch what you say. Who is worthy to be counted amongst the extraordinary? One who lives with integrity and does what is right and recognizes the truth, whose tongue utters no slander, who does others no evil, and who does not reproach his neighbors, but rather feels scorn for those who act despicably and cherishes others who behave honorably. Unwavering, it is a person who will keep a promise even at great personal expense. Whoever lives this way will always be remembered. Governor Shumlin.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this memorial for Edgar. I was so honored when Madeleine May asked me on behalf of all of us here to say a few words. And here we are in the Edgar May Center of Springfield for a moment's reflection on the moment I first met Edgar, and I'll never forget that moment. It was in 1976. And I had the unenviable job of being the campaign coordinator for the Thomas P. Salmon for United States Senate campaign in a primary, a Democratic primary, to which some of us have some familiarity, in a family fight in southern Vermont between then Governor Salmon and Scott Skinner, who at that time was also a southern Vermonter. He was living in Guilford with Mary. And the governor said to me, get up to Springfield and go see Edgar. Make sure he's going to be working hard. I didn't know who Edgar was. I certainly knew where Springfield was, being a puppy boy, so I found myself in Edgar's grace up at Lockridge. And I've always thought that you can learn so much about someone's character from where they live, in their home, and what it is about that place. And as you know, Lockridge was central to Edgar's spiritual being, and to his family's spiritual being, as was his community, his state, his nation. But if Edgar could ask for one thing from all of us today, it would be to treat this celebration of his life with the same grace and dignity and sense of fun and adventure that he brought to everything I ever saw him touch. So we shall not be remorseful. We shall not be grim. We shall not be overly negative in terms of our emotions as we go into this, because that was the last thing that Edgar ever lived or would want at this moment. So let's celebrate for a second what is so difficult to articulate about a person, and I say this carefully because I know there's a lot of state senators here and former state senators, including myself and our congressperson and others in the crowd. But Edgar, without a doubt, was in our modern times the most eloquent state senator that Vermont ever had, bar none. He could plead a case with the kind of vision and charisma and tenacity and convincing words and poetry and moving oratory to which I know none of us will ever aspire. That was a great gift. But he used that charisma and that positive ability to make change throughout his life to make extraordinary things happen. What drove that? You know, it seems like he came from an unusual family. A sister who he adored and who made some accomplishments in her own way in life that some of us are familiar with. But also a real sense of how you take an ability to think and to act and to speak and to turn it to action. And it seems to me he did it in three central ways. The first was for his nation. How many of us could have dreamt of winning a Pulitzer, of being called to Washington by the President of the United States, in this case President Johnson, to help fight the war on poverty, to be called down by Sergeant Schreiber to lead VISTA, to focus on ensuring that people who didn't have resources had enough and had a better life, through his focus on welfare, which is of course what he won the Pulitzer for at the Buffalo Evening News, to really be the creator of so many programs that became central to poverty in those years, including Head Start. Played a major role in the Special Olympics under Schreiber. Had so many accomplishments on a national level. But what I want to talk about for a second was his commitment to Vermont and to Springfield. When I came into the House, appointed by his sister, one of her least smart judgments, probably, and there was Edgar, the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And I know there's so many people here that had the privilege of serving with him. Secretary Racine just told me 6 years he served with Edgar on the Appropriations Committee. I know that Congressman Welch spent a fair amount of time there with him, as did so many others. I spent a little time in that room after Edgar had retired from politics. But what characterized Edgar's service to Vermont is what characterized his lifetime calling. And it was, without a doubt, his undying commitment to those who didn't have a voice, to the poor, to those who were disabled, or to those that needed a helping hand from government in order to find their way in life. That was Edgar May's mission. I think Dickie Drysdale might have said it best recently when he wrote or said about Edgar, he took his passion for the powerless to the pinnacle circles of power. And it is there that he made a real difference for those that needed us. And I gotta tell you, as governor, that's a shining example for me. We often get tied up in the weeds in our service to the public, but Edgar would never let us forget our commitment to those that didn't have a voice, needed a hand, and deserved it from government. And he was a powerful example of how you make government work for those who need us. We stand here in the Edgar May Center, and I bet there's not a person here who didn't have their pocket picked at one point in some form or another with Edgar's tenacity to help this center become what it is. This center is Edgar's commitment to those that needed help, and in many cases couldn't afford it, in his hometown of Springfield. When Edgar first told me about this proposal and the money that would be involved, I said to him, Edgar, that's a very ambitious plan. But it didn't stop. And I'll never forget, after ensuring that the state made some contribution to this project, he kept coming back, just like he kept coming back to you, his family, his friends, the town of Springfield, the state of Vermont, the federal government, our congressional delegation. The tenacity that he used, the charm, the skill, the wit, are the powers that he used to make you successful, are the powers that he used in life to empower those that didn't have a voice. I won't forget the time that I was towards the end of the session, and I was president of the Senate at that time. And Doug Racine was chair of health and welfare, but he was very committed to his friendship with Edgar and the Senate. And he came to me during tough economic times when we were slashing budgets, and he said, listen, it was towards the end of the session, I spoke with Edgar last night, and he needs another $100,000 for the center this year. And I said, having many requests at that time for money, Doug, you know there's no way, right? And he goes, well, will you just hear him out? I said, well, of course I'll hear Edgar out, but we are broke. We've given it away. There is nothing left this year. Shortly thereafter, Edgar got me on the phone. Next thing I knew, he was in my office. Edgar got his money. I want to close by saying a few things about Edgar's family. I know that this is an extraordinarily difficult blow to Madeleine and to the family. But I think we all know, for anyone that ever went to Macross, anyone who ever was involved with Edgar's life, that his real heart and his real passion was his sister, his family, his nieces, his nephews, his great-nieces, his great-nephews. And it's to all of you gathered here today that we want to assure you that we're going to take with us a piece of Edgar's extraordinary love and kindness and generosity and spiritual goodness as we march out of this Edgar May Center and forward with our lives. Edgar, as you know, was the master uncle to Madeline and Arthur's kids, Julia, Peter, Pat, and Daniel, to Peggy's kids, Michaela and James. But to the next generation, Edgar was with great pride the great grand uncle, and he let people know it. I know that Will and David and Sarah and Sam and Jacob Kunin, as well as Sophia, all took something great from Edgar's tutelage. Lisa shared this story with me that I thought told it all about Edgar. Last summer when Will was graduating from high school and moving on to college, he told him that if he got a minimum wage job, didn't matter where, didn't matter what, but it had to be working for a minimum wage, he'd match his earnings. Edgar knew, as he dealt with both his nieces and nephews, and he did a pretty good job of it, although some of them have been so successful, a minimum wage job for a few weeks wasn't heard of. But he did such a great job with both his being the great uncle and the great granduncle. He knew that he could do things that parents couldn't get away with. That he could say to great nieces and to great nephews, I have a plan for you that's going to enrich your life and make it better. And make sure that when you go forward into the working world, whatever your opportunities are, that working a minimum wage job and working hard is an important part of ensuring that you are going to make a contribution to this world as I have. So let's all pledge today, instead of mourning Edgar's loss, but in celebrating his life, to promise that we will take a piece of his vision, of his goodness, of his humor, of his character, of his penchant for fine wine and fine food. And let's not forget, after he was all done with politics and doing great things, he went on to Maggie to become a great pastry chef. Let's not forget his passion for cross-country skiing and hiking and swimming and biking and the outdoors and the natural resources, and his incredible ability to live life to its fullest. That, combined with his commitment to those that didn't have a voice, is why we're all here today with such sadness, but such tremendous enthusiasm to take a piece of Edgar May and carry it with us wherever we go and whatever we do. Thank you, Madam, for including me today.
So is there a question that you're supposed to applaud or so it's sort of somewhere between a public celebration and also a spiritual ceremony, so I'd like you all to hold your applause and just observe the words of our speakers and our guests. I'd like to invite George Shumlin.
Madeleine and family, I really appreciate being asked and the opportunity to say a few words about my good friend Edgar May. My comments today are more importantly, however, on behalf of all of those of us and everyone here who worked with Edgar in what was a wonderful and magnificent crusade to build this center, and for all who now benefit from and enjoy the Edgar May. Words like a life well lived, larger than life, a good life, are quite often used at occasions like this, and sometimes may be considered trite, and many times hyperbole. However, when we think about Edgar, these words do not begin to describe his life and legacy. Edgar and Madeleine were on the last ship to sail from Italy before it was closed in World War II. He arrived in the U.S., so he told me, knowing only 3 words, yes, no, and bathroom, and in typical Edgar fashion, the latter was the most important. He's the only person I've known, and I expect the only person everyone here today has known, who won the Pulitzer Prize, was the Inspector General for the War on Poverty, has met with presidents in the Oval Office, flown on Air Force One, was our chief assistant to our ambassador in France, CEO of the Special Olympics, played touch football at Hyannisport. And as nifty as Edgar was, he didn't do all of those things at once. But for an encore, those of you who have been to Lockridge through the years may recall that on the piano, there were generally 2 pictures. One was a photograph of Rose Kennedy, whether Edgar took it or not, I have no idea. And the other that was there quite often was a picture of Edgar and the governor, his friend Arnold. And it was taken, I'm told, after a special event, Olympic event, a function in Vienna. And there they were, and talk about 2 larger-than-life figures. They both qualified. Both in tuxedos, seated in overstuffed chairs with their feet up on footstools, with a cigar in one hand and a cognac in the other. And if anybody here today can top that, as the fellow on TV says, come on down, because we'd like to meet you. I met Edgar first more than 40 years ago. I worked on all of his political campaigns, beginning with his first in 1974 for the Vermont House. His last campaign in 1990 for the Vermont Senate, however, was not his last campaign. It was the campaign to build this center And this, as many of us know, was a long campaign. It began in 1997, and we opened the doors here in December of 2006. Shortly after we opened, Edgar asked me to come down to Montbras for dinner. He was somber, reflective, and very, very proud, as he should be. He said that this building, that building this center, was as important as anything he'd ever done in his life, and the most rewarding. And he said, George, just think about it. He said, this campaign was longer than the last 2 presidential campaigns. And then he got up in my face, as we know him to do, when he wanted to make a point that he was sure he wanted you to hear and understand. And he got up in my face and he said, a hell of a lot more successful. That was it. And it was successful because it was not a campaign for or about Edgar, but a campaign to build community, a sense of sharing to build this center, so that everyone, regardless of their social, economic situation, can be a member. This is a health and wellness center for everyone today and for future generations. And to quote Edgar, a place where people will be on the inside looking out and not on the outside looking in. Edgar said that the best gift is a gift where the donor does not know the donee and the donee does not know the donor. That may be true, but it is certainly not true today. We know who gave us this gift, this center, and for his vision, his perseverance, his dedication, and for this splendid facility, we thank Edgar May.
Congressman Peter Welch.
You know, Edgar had a big job. He had to be Edgar May. He was involved in so many different things. It touched so many different lives in so many different places. And when you think about it, you know, all of us read about the family history, and that day when you all came in with your mom, Madeleine, and saw the Statue of Liberty, I remember Edgar talking about that. And 2 children on the last boat out of France before the Nazis controlled that country, having arrived in this new country with no idea what would lay ahead. And I guess your mom said anything is possible in America. And the journey that you and Edgar took proved that anything was possible in Buffalo, anything was possible in Washington, D.C., anything was possible in Paris, where Edgar spent some time. But mostly in Montpelier and in Springfield, where he really invested himself and we came to know and appreciate him. You know, Governor Shumlin was talking about Edgar's eloquence, and it really was kind of unfair of him to use it on us all of the time and with such effect. But he kind of embodied qualities that I think a lot of us here admire about Vermont. He was a man of great accomplishment, but great modesty. You never heard him boasting about what he did. He was tenacious in his advocacy, but he was gentle in his means of persuasion. You know, some of us saw that movie Lincoln, and were amazed, of course, at his eloquence. But what was displayed in that movie was that the president had these powers of indirection as well, to ease tension, and really to kind of create an atmosphere where people wanted to say yes to the person who was talking to them. And I remember my first exposure to your brother, who was the master politician. And in Montpelier, there was oftentimes, when you were governor, Madeleine, a discussion about who was the better politician, right? You were governor, he was chair of the Appropriations Committee, and you were, as it turns out, an incredible team. But my first exposure to Edgar was in 1984. I mean, actually, I knew him before, but we campaigned together for the state senate in 1984. He'd been in the House, I was in the Senate. And you know, I had my platform. I was ready to go to all of the forums and talk about my new plan of property tax, my new way to deal with the budget, the new way to deal with economic development. Edgar was talking about the explosion of zucchini in Vermont gardens. And he would give these descriptions of zucchini here, there, and everywhere. And I'd be scratching my head as I would be watching people in the audience who were kind of really skeptical about what my tax plan was, nodding in great agreement about the zucchini. The other thing I remember about Edgar was you know, a lot of Vermonters were proud of the billboard law that Republicans and Democrats passed. Edgar totally disregarded it. In 1984, he had that old sob of his, and he put a billboard on the roof of his car that was so large that it was both a billboard violation and a wind hazard. He would tell stories when he got to these campaigns and old ranges about how he'd been swerving all over the road. And it was a trait I saw in him when I served with him and Peter and Doug. Sam Lloyd, his really dear friend, is here, where in the tension of the moment, in the burning passion that he had to get the project done, it was always about doing the right thing in a fiscally responsible way. He would create an atmosphere of cooperation where the people who were tense and anxious wanted to feel good that they had gotten something done. And it was an extraordinary skill that he combined with a strategic vision. You know, I would remember seeing him in the cafeteria in January or February, and I couldn't quite understand what he was doing or why he was talking to those 2 or 3 people. And then in April or early May, when all things came together and those people were needed in order to provide the vote in that committee, it mysteriously happened. And it was Edgar who did that. But, you know, I think all of us, you know, appreciated his company. And we felt inspired by his commitment. We were moved by his modesty. We saw his sensitivity and were just awed by his flexibility of language and his big heart, which he expressed with his admiration for the people who were in his life. And I'm not just talking about his family. It was the town employees, it was the dump attendant that he met when he was campaigning, it was the security staff at the State House, and he noticed and observed something about them and had a real nice interaction that just, again, helped create that atmosphere that was so conducive to getting things done. You know, Governor Shumlin said he enjoyed life, and he led a big life. And one of the things that I find when I talk to many of you here about Edgar is all of our stories are about his ability to see something before us and appreciate it. You know, he did love the cigar and the brandy. He did love fine things. He did live for a while in Paris. But what Edgar lived every day was with an awareness that there was beauty in front of us if we just could behold it. There would be beauty before us if we could just create it. And nothing so is a legacy of that way of living in this recreation center. I was talking to Sam Lloyd just before we started when Edgar brought Sam down here when this was just rubble and debris. And he said to Sam, this is going to be the recreation center. And that accomplishment and the pride he had, Madeleine, walking with you down the aisle when you were elected as the first woman governor in the state of Vermont are two things that for Edgar meant more than anything else. So all of us today here are so fortunate that we knew Edgar. And not just because we enjoyed those moments with Edgar, but because we're the better for it. He's taught us how to see the world we're in and behold the beauty in it. And he taught us how if we just allow ourselves to do it, beauty is here for us to create. Thank you, Edgar May. Thank you, Madeleine May Kunin.
Peggy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today to celebrate this extremely special occasion. My name is Maggie Lockridge, also known as Peggy Lockridge, and I am the sister of Louise Breason May, who spent 2 glorious years married to Edgar May. When I heard that this occasion was called Celebration of Life, I thought, what a perfect name, because Edgar celebrated life every single day. I wanted to share with you one of my fondest memories of Edgar. It happened on a winter day in 1961 at Magic Mountain Ski Area, and it was the day that he met my sister Louise. I want to tell you just a little bit about Louise. We were both born in Springfield, Vermont. Our parents are Leon and Cecile Breason, formerly of Elm Hill, for over 40 years. My sister went to Boston College. She went to Regis College for her Bachelor of Arts in English. Then she went to Boston College for her Master's in Russian History. In 1961, she was in New York City. She was working for Radio Free Europe, and she was writing the propaganda that we sent via Radio Free Europe behind the Iron Curtain. Unfortunately, she was kind of depressed at this particular time because she had just undergone a broken marital engagement. And so I used to drive home from Boston, where I was in nurses training, and she would drive up from New York City, and on this particular weekend, we went skiing at Magic Mountain. It was about 10:30 in the morning, and back then, if you remember, you had to go single file and on the line up to the chair, and there were no quads. It took you quite a while to get there, and we were in line, and all of a sudden, we heard the most fantastic yodeling you have ever heard. And it was echoing off this mountain and that mountain and that mountain. And we just went, oh my God, what is going on here? And we looked up, and there's Edgar. And he's in a double chair all by himself, and his skis are swinging back and forth, and his arms over the chair, and he's looking up at that beautiful blue sky, and just, I know he's thinking, I'm in the Swiss Alps. About an hour and a half later, we're back in that same line, and my sister is in front of me, and Edgar May is in front of her. Well, I knew that I had to step in and help fail along. So when Louise got to the top of one of those little moguls that formed, I gave her a shove. And she went right down between Edgar's legs, and he landed on top of her. This is a true story. And they discovered that he lived on 12th and 5th in New York City, and she lived on like 11th and Lex, and they went together. They were courted for 3 years, and they were married for an additional 2 years when Louise was tragically killed in an automobile accident, which was very sad for all of us, but I have tried to keep the Edgar and Louise legacy going. My son's named James Edgar. My daughter is named Kayla Louise, and her daughter is named Cassie May. There are 2 other memories of Edgar that I wanted to share. One of them is we shared many meal, and Edgar would always take that red wine and he'd raise it up and he'd say, "Le joie de vivre." And we all know that's our Edgar. My other memory is Edgar trying to teach me how to parallel ski, and he would ski behind me. And I would constantly hear him saying, "Keep the faith on the downhill ski." Just a very dear memory to me. Edgar, for the last 45 years, has always said, "Maggie, thank you for keeping me as part of your life." And I said, Edgar, thank you for being here.
Peter. Peter.
Congressman Welch, I'm really glad you told that brief story about Edgar's campaign sign, which said, Edgar May for Senate. I came down, I can't remember which campaign it was, but I came down to help Edgar for that last weekend before Election Day. And he had put another sign at a rakish angle on top of that sign. And it said, this space available on November 2nd. that was Edgar's sense of humor. There's so much we could say about Edgar, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of themes. First is, Edgar believed deeply in the critical importance of family and friends and community. And I know, and my brother Adam, my sister Julia, and Daniel, we all knew that we were surrounded by love and warmth when we were in Edgar's presence. He always let you know exactly how he felt about you. No mistake about it. He impressed upon us constantly about the importance of taking care of your friends, of taking care of your family, of being a part of your community, and helping people in the community. I could give many, many examples, and I'm sure many other people here could do as well, but I'll just give a couple of small ones. He always was getting in that saw to go visit somebody who was ill, to bring somebody food, to make that phone call, to check in on somebody. I also saw him take care of a family in Springfield, a single mother, unemployed, was about to lose her house, and he was struggling and negotiating with the bank to try to prevent that woman from being foreclosed upon. And it was just a routine thing that he did. For Adam and Julia and Daniel and I think I speak for all of us when I say that he treated us from a very young age as peers, as equals. He always wanted to know what we were thinking. He wanted to know our opinion on issues large and small. He wanted to know what we thought about the issues of the day. And as my brother Daniel pointed out, he challenged us. He challenged us to try new things. He challenged us to do something important with our lives. And in that way, I think he empowered us. He empowered us to take risks, try new things. Now, as has been said by almost all the other speakers, and it's a universal truth about Edgar, he truly enjoyed life. Yes, he worked hard, and he believed deeply in the work ethic, and particularly in the benefits of hard physical labor. But when the work was done, he really knew how to have a good time. And there are just so many experiences, but the overarching theme for me is spending time with him somehow amplified the intensity of whatever experience you were having. So if you went out with him fishing in the evening on Muckross Pond and it was getting dark, he would tell you to be absolutely quiet. Absolutely quiet. And if you banged the oars just a little bit, he would swear at you, but then you'd be quiet. But you would strain to listen to the ripples on the water as the beaver swam by. I also never saw my uncle more excited than when my brother Daniel caught a huge bass at Muckross Pond. Daniel must have been 6 years old, and this bass almost pulled him off of the dam. He was hanging on for dear life, and when Edgar saw that fish, Edgar was so excited, so excited. And I know that Adam greatly treasured his times with Edgar, and I believe that Edgar taught Adam many things, and to appreciate many things that Adam used to hold dear today. I remember you sugaring with Edgar, and to this day you now have a sugar house, and you have an expanding sugar operation, but that was one of the many legacies you have. But again, he knew how to live life. So having a dinner on his patio at Muckross of grilled lamb chops with lots of salt, fresh vegetables from the garden, and of course, that glass of red wine. That was not just a summer dinner. magnifique, formidable, fantastic. And he felt that way. He felt that way when you were with him. And you know, speaking of French, he passed on a deep affection, I think, for us with French culture and European culture generally. And I think that's one of the reasons, Julia, you know, you love traveling so much and learning about other countries, and Daniel, of course, you do as well. So those are our legacies that we'll carry with us. And a part of this zest for life was he was just plain fun to be around. And he was spontaneous. And Julia reminded me the other day, he had this game that he played with us when we were really little. And he would sit us around the table, and he would grab his thumb, and he would grimace, and he would yell, and then he would pull off his thumb. And then amazingly, he would put it back on. He was just a really fun person to hang out with. And he always was welcoming us. I mean, Muckcross, for us, was a place that we could stop by anytime. The door was always open, both figuratively and literally. And if you stopped by, he would stop whatever he was doing, go have a swim with you in the pond, or if he was working on a project, he might give you a shovel and expect you to work for the next half hour with him shoveling dirt. But again, just a wonderful experience. One more thing I'm going to tell you, an experience that I had in the 3rd grade. Edgar was living with Judith in Paris, and he stopped by one Saturday morning on his way back to Paris and said, "Peter, let's go for a walk." So we went for a walk in the woods, and he turned to me and said, "I'd like you to come to Paris with me tonight. Do you want to go?" And I was pretty shocked. I went back and spoke briefly to my parents. Somehow they agreed to let me go, and away we went that night for a 5-week stay in Paris. Now, when we got to the airport, Judith came to pick Edgar up. And right as we were coming out of the gate, he said, "Peter, get behind that pillar. Hide." So Judith runs up, Edgar and Judith embrace. Then he turns around and gives me the motion. I run out. Judith is shocked. He had not told Judith I was coming. And that was just a wonderful trip, and we were soon joined by Julia and Madeleine, and we had just a great time. In closing, there's many, many people I could thank for all the loving care that they gave Edgar, loving care people gave Edgar in his final weeks. But I particularly want to thank my brother, Adam. Adam was very, very, very close contact with Edgar's doctors and the other folks who were taking care of Edgar and to his son. Adam was just wonderful in keeping all of us in the Kunin family, the Lockridge family, and Judith and Sarah Clay and others informed of how he was doing. And Adam, I just really want to say thank you. And you also helped Edgar just a huge amount during the last couple of years of his life with his medical issues. And I know he cherished his relationship with you and with you, Jane, too. So, thank you.
Well, Edgar would be thrilled today to see the Health and Recreation Center literally filled to the brim, overflowing with people he loved and those who loved him. And a celebration of his life is exactly what he wanted. No mourning, no regrets. He was many things, as you've heard. A visionary leader, a creative thinker, a doer, a mentor, a man who had a gift for friendship, and a man who was always a gentleman. He was impatient, generous, persistent, loving, funny, sometimes angry, even frustrated with the state of the world and the people in it, because he could also see the dark side. Too much poverty, too little justice, and more than anything, He wanted to set right what he saw to be wrong. I knew him in all those incarnations, but I knew him best as my brother. And one sure way to get a rise out of Edgar was for me to introduce him as my older brother. 4 years to be exact. We were a small family, just the two of us and my widowed mother. The phrase single-parent family had not yet been coined. He served both as my big brother and as my surrogate father. Our father died young, I'm sorry. I often sought and accepted his reading of how the world worked and his personal advice about how I should live my life. I'm sure many of you heard that too. And there were times when I rebelled, having to separate myself as children do. Either way, he had a huge influence on me, both directly and indirectly. Yes, there were gaps and differences. When I was busy having babies, he had started on his first career as a journalist. When we were both in the Vermont House, and the speaker called the roll alphabetically, he didn't like it that the letter K for Kunin came before M for May. Voting with your sister again, eh? Some legislator would tease him. He thought he had fixed the problem, when one day he asked the speaker to call the roll backwards. Here pandemonium broke out, because legislators didn't know whether to vote yes or no, not being able to gauge which way the wind was blowing, as they usually did. When I was governor and he chaired the Senate Appropriations Committee, he thoroughly believed that the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. I admit, I once thought that when I chaired the House Appropriations Committee and Dick Snelling was governor. Where you stand depends on where you sit. On a few hot items, my staff was busily negotiating back and forth between my office and his committee room. But finally, they figured out the root cause. It was the tricycle. When I was 4 years old, Edgar had taken my red tricycle apart and never figured out how to put it together again. Edgar believed in family. He was there for us when we needed him. He was always at the table for the Jewish holidays, for birthdays, for graduations. His bear hugs left little room to breathe. Not having children of his own, my children became his children, my grandchildren, his grandchildren, taking pride in all of their achievements, including catching their first fish on Rocco's Pond. Some have asked, how did you both get so much involved in public life? I don't have an answer. We had a courageous and adventurous mother who sailed to America in wartime with 2 children, ages 6 and 10. She wanted the best for her children and looked to this country as the land of opportunity where anything was possible. And we believed her. Sometimes it surprised me how much Edgar and I thought alike. We got mad at the same things. We saw people in almost the same light. We laughed at the same jokes, and we had similar dreams for the future, both for the country and for ourselves. He never thought of himself as a lifetime politician. He could easily relate to people with elegant titles and long resumes. And with equal delight, he could befriend a handyman, admire his skill, and enjoy the give and take. He loved to work with his hands and relished the results, whether it's plowing his own road or planting a garden. Edgar never respected class distinctions. He took great pleasure in small things. I don't want to make him sound like an alcoholic, but a fine glass of wine, which has been mentioned many times, my mother's recipe for apple cake, my well-cooked brisket, and a lingering, luminous sunset. This last August, when he was thinking about the future of lacrosse, he explained that he could not leave. I watched a heron land on the water this morning. That's all I need. I could just sit here and watch it all day. He has left us now and left a gap in our lives, small for some, large for others. But the aura of his presence will not disappear. Some days before he died, he whispered, "I've had a great ride. I've been lucky. We've both been lucky. I'm at peace." And so he was, and so are we. He made our lives better, more meaningful, more challenging, more enjoyable, and certainly much more interesting. Let us raise a virtual glass to Edgar, to Edgar, to Edgar.
So we're coming in for a landing here. I invite you to join in singing We Remember Him. It's in your program. It's just a chanty melody, you'll get it right away. At the rising of the sun and it's going down, we remember him. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. As long as we live, we too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we have joy that we crave to share, we remember him. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember him. When we have achievements that are based on his, we remember him. As long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. But each one of us has a memory of Edgar that I know is just ready to burst out of your mouth. And so, in the interest of not being here until the sun goes down, what I'd like you to do right now is to bring to mind just a 2-second little anecdote that you have about Edgar, something he shared with you, something that made you laugh, or a tractor pull he was at, and turn to the person next to you and share it with them. And I would be really good about calling you back to order in a few minutes. So allow the room to fill with stories of Edgar May. Go. treat to watch the faces around as you shared your stories and your hearts open. I want to share with you two more things. This is a prayer book that belonged to Edgar and Madeleine's great-grandfather. It's the kind of thing that makes me cry. And it was an artifact of his Jewish identity that was really precious to him. I knew Edgar from when we come to the Comfort Town Hall of Turkey Suppers, but I more recently knew him when Madeleine would drag him to high holiday services. And I would turn around and there he was, and he was singing and loving it and sleeping like everybody does. But there was a part of his identity that was very deeply connected to being a Jew. Arriving in America, escaping the insanity there. And one of the deepest teachings about being a Jew is that after 2,000 years, we never developed a culture of revenge, but always nurtured what could be in the world. Always believed the best could happen despite what had happened. And I know that Edgar really, really embodied that ability to not look back, not take revenge, but to just push on to a world that could be. I invite us to stand for the traditional prayer that was recited in the Jewish memorial services. And the English, it doesn't matter about the English. The Hebrew is about the phonemes that open our hearts. The essence of what we're calling out to is that now that we can no longer take care of this person we love, could God please take care of them now? Because we are no longer able to touch them. Following this, I'll ask those who are mourning and those who are to the yard site to recite the mourner's Kaddish, and then we will just move on out to the back, and there'll be a receiving line here, and that will last for a while until it gets time to dissipate that. And you're welcome to not fall in the pool, but enjoy the summer past that is along the back wall.
Ah
Farmer's cottage, and it's found on the back of your handout. It was for a morning and observing the yard sale anniversary of someone else's death together. Yit kedar, yit kedash, kedar. Amen. Ve'amon yivra chayte, yivra chayte, ve'chayekon, u'yumechon, u'vechayekon, u'vechayekon, Israel. Ba'adallah, u'yizman, u'riv, Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach, le'olam, u'amen, amaya. Yit barach, u'yishtabach, u'yit ha'ar, u'yit raman, u'yit nasir, u'yit hadar, u'yit aleh, u'yit halal, shemei kedusha, u'yitchu, le'ela, mikol, v'chata, v'shirata, tushbechata, v'nechemata, da'amiran, v'yaman, v'yiru. Amen.